Then. Hello, everyone. My name is Akari, and I'm a Programs Fellow here at AMP Global Youth. And I'm here today to talk with Nisreen Elsaim, one of our incredible youth climate visionaries. Nisreen is a Sudanese climate and environmental activist with over a decade of experience. Nisreen entered the climate movement in 2012 with a firm grounding in science, pursuing her bachelor's in physics with the University of Khartoum. She went on to complete her master's in renewable energy at the same institution. Alongside mentoring youth around the world, Nisreen has chaired the Sudan Youth Organization on Climate Change since 2018. She has also been a junior negotiator with the African Group of Negotiators since 2018. Recently, Nisreen was chosen to chair the UN Secretary's General Youth Advisory on Climate Change, alongside 6 other youth activists. Welcome, we're so glad to have you.
Thank you, and I'm also very glad to be here with you today.
Alrighty, well, we're going to hop right into some questions, starting way back. So you started your degree in 2011 with physics and went on to get your master's in renewable energy. What first brought you into the climate movement?
Well, everyone have a very fancy answer for this question, but for me, I was just bored from school. I was in my freshman year at university, and because of political problems, our university closed for 3 months. I was thinking on how to actually use my time in these 3 months when everything was locked. And I started to introduce myself to something called science diplomacy, which is using science in diplomatic discussions. And the 2 biggest topics that occurred to my mind was actually not only to my mind, but actually in the research I did about science diplomacy was water, because there's a lot of shared waters in the world, and there's a lot of diplomacy in actually managing these waters. Also climate change, because it's a very scientific problem in the base, but it's also very much diplomatized, and there's a lot of political interest and economical burdens on the issue of climate change, although it's a very much pure scientific problem. I liked climate change very much from the concepts I read about, and I felt it was very close to the field I chose as my academic study, which is physics. And so that's how I started doing climate change, actually.
That's incredible. I think certainly having extra time for several months following nearly 2.5 years of pandemic, although that's a very different reason, we had different time, is really understandable to our youth network. All right, so you've been in climate work for a decade now, and you chair a UN advisory on climate change. Do you see intergovernmental organizations like the UN as an effective means to deal with climate change, or does climate action need to come from elsewhere?
Yeah, so actually, when you say a decade of experience, I feel so old.
Sorry.
But it's true. No worries. But it's very true. I started 2012 and now it's 2022. Well, actually, climate action is something that everyone should do, otherwise it will not work. It's just like COVID. If not everyone's safe, then no one is safe. And climate action is exactly the same. If everyone did not take their part of action, then no one is safe too. So intergovernmental, like UN, governments, civil society, person in their houses, politicians, artists, scientists, anyone must do climate action, because it's the only way that the humanity will actually survive. So yes, they can, and also yes, we have to have other bodies with us too.
Absolutely. Well, also, in addition to your UN position, you've been a negotiator with the African Group of Negotiators for 3 years now, focusing on climate and renewable energy policies. How has representing a broader African climate alliance changed the way you think about climate work?
Okay, first of all, just let's do some small reality check. Africa is only responsible for 3 to 2% of the global emissions. If you took Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria out, you will find that Africa is only responsible to 1.5% of the global emissions. Yet, Africa has the highest rate of poverty, highest rate of illiteracy, the highest rates of wars, highest rates of everything bad. And that's very much linked to the nature of the African continent and how much injustice is happening towards the African nations. But of course, it's very much linked that African depends 100% right now on the nature for food, for water, for housing, for everything. And when nature turn it's back to people, especially vulnerable people who depend on it very much, like the African, it's very bad. And so me joining the African group made me realize that for us, not only the African negotiator, but the African continent in general, and especially the African youth, it's actually a matter of life and death to continue doing climate action. For us, it's not just doing service to the community or filling our spare time or anything, because otherwise our communities will disappear and we will have no future.
Absolutely. Wow. So as a young person in climate work, many are often spoken over or disregarded, even when they're following science or negotiating with science like you have. Are there ways in which you've been ignored in your time fighting for climate action, and how do you deal with them?
Can we repeat this point? Sorry.
Sorry. Are there ways in which you've been ignored in your time fighting for climate action, and how did you deal with them?
Yeah, actually, no. I was so not only lucky, but I guess blessed that the climate movement since I joined growed very much and quite big. So I don't think anyone ignored me or the movement that we are doing. But what I can tell you, there was a lot of discrimination, and a lot of people have suffered from sex discrimination, for example, because being female, or race, for example, for being African or being Black or whatever. But for me, it wasn't the case at all. And I'm a Muslim, so a lot of people also had Islamophobia problems, but it wasn't the case for me too. What I suffered from the most was my age. And how I look, probably because my face is even younger than my real age. So people tend to actually not take me seriously when I was speaking, for example, in the beginning of the work, or I get the attitude of, oh my God, how old are you to speak to us about it, and stuff like this. Even in the last COP, when when we were in Glasgow, I had a session and I was a speaker. So when I was telling the security guy that I'm a speaker, it's like, no, this is a head of state level event. He can't be a speaker. I was like, I am a speaker. You will see. I know. But so yeah, for me, ageism was the most problematic issue, comparing to other problems that young people normally face.
Yes, well, speaking of COP, I watched your speech on the leaders event before I came to meet you, and it was absolutely incredible. And in that speech, you really pushed your unwavering confidence in the global climate movement. And I want to ask, with the outcome of last year's COP, has that changed?
Yeah, no. Unfortunately, the governments are not really ready to make big steps. They are very much worried about economic collapse. They are very worried of the impacts of the COVID. They are very worried that we will have a war and they will not have enough money to buy guns and other machines, for example. But what they don't realize is that we might be dead very soon before any war can happen if they continue doing what they are doing right now. There are countries who are actually willing to do things. Unfortunately, their effort is hindered by the other influencers, the big countries that influence. So there's a lot of work still needs to be done to not convince, because we are beyond that. I think all of them know very much how dangerous the situation is, but to actually make them do actions. Otherwise, it will be too late when they actually start doing actions, it will be too late to save the humanity and the planet.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think all of us around the world can see that. So again, you've been in climate advocacy, you have so much experience. What do you think is the key to engaging and mobilizing audiences around the world around climate change?
Make it personal. I mean, this will be my big advice. When you make the issue personal and you make everyone feel that this problem actually belongs to them, it will hit them and they are the one who can change it, a lot of things change. When you make it an abstract problem with the big manchettes or the big titles and big statistics, people like they tend to actually get scared and then hide away or shy away from it or stuff. But when you make it personal to them, then they will realize that it's their problem and they actually can do something about it. At least not electing the wrong people, so they can give us hard time in the in the negotiations, for example. But there's a lot of things that young people and also normal citizens can do, and using their voices very, very loud and very wise is one of them.
No, certainly that's incredible advice. And in the line of advice, what should youth activists know as they engage in climate work? And what is your top piece of advice?
Everything. You have to know everything. So we had a training where I told the guys I was giving the training them, I can challenge you that I did something on all of the 17 SDGs. And they were saying, no, no way, you're just working on SDG 13, only climate change. I said, yes, that's true. My focus is climate change, but unfortunately, climate change is interconnected with everything. And we started naming the SDGs one by one. And I started to show them how climate change can impact this SDG. And if we did not do climate action, we cannot actually succeed in reaching this SDG. And I mean, the work we've done with different organizations around the year actually evolved in all of the SDGs somehow. So I remember they were so amazed to see how much climate change is impacting everything. So in order to be able to help this issue of everything, you need to know a little bit at least about everything too.
Absolutely. We saw that this last weekend with our conference. We had so many speakers to speak to gender justice and so many other forms of climate justice. Alrighty, well, that is our last question for you today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm so glad. I'm sorry I missed the conference. I
No
had
worries, we're so glad
time
to
zone
have you
issue.
now. And we hope to see you this summer with our AMP Global Youth Summer Intensive. All right, thank you everyone. We'll see you all later.